What in God's name is that? I peeked through my blinds at 5:45 a.m. to find my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, standing on her perfectly manicured lawn in a bathrobe, phone aimed directly at my front yard. She wasn't alone. 3 other neighbors had gathered, mouths agape, as the morning show began. Dawn's first light caught the reflective runway strips in my front yard, just as the first robotic Sparrow emerged from its hangar. A gentle whirring sound filled the air as its tiny wheels carried it down the illuminated tarmac. Flight 217 cleared for takeoff, announced a miniature speaker from the control tower, followed by authentic air traffic control chatter. The bird spread its wings, eyes blinking with LED lights, before gliding upward on nearly invisible wires to perch on my porch railing. 5 more mechanical birds followed in sequence, each taxiing down different runways with flashing navigation lights and remarkably realistic chirping. The airport's control tower, complete with rotating beacon, coordinated the entire ballet of artificial avians. It wasn't always like this. Just 3 months ago, all I had was a simple wooden birdhouse. I'd spent weeks crafting it from reclaimed barn wood, sanding each piece by hand, and adding tiny details like a miniature porch swing and flower boxes filled with real moss. The neighborhood birds loved it. Chickadees, finches, even a family of wrens moved in. Kids would stop on their bikes to watch the birds come and go. It brought me joy every morning with a chorus of natural songs. Then the letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead, 3 pages of violation notices, and photos of my birdhouse circled in angry red marker. Unsightly outdoor fixture. I had 48 hours to remove the unauthorized structure or face daily fines. When I called to appeal, I was granted a 10-minute meeting with Mrs. Kensington, our HOA president, a woman whose lawn was so perfect it looked painted on. She adjusted her glasses to read from her notes. Bird domiciles attract pests, create unsanitary conditions, and decrease property values. She looked up, her thin lips pressed together. They're glorified rat motels, Mr. Chen. Our community standards specifically prohibit unsightly lawn ornaments. But it's a home for birds, I protested. They're part of nature. So are termites, she sniffed. The board's decision is final. Remove it or we'll be forced to take action. As I left her office, I noticed the irony. Her car had a Save the Environment bumper sticker right next to her HOA parking permit. I didn't want trouble, but I also wasn't going to let a power-hungry board dictate which parts of nature were welcome in my own yard. Little did Mrs. Kensington know she was about to teach me the fine art of malicious compliance. For the next week, I tried playing by the rules. Surely there was some middle ground where both the HOA and the birds could be happy, right? My first attempt seemed foolproof. I carefully examined the HOA handbook, all 147 mind-numbing pages of it, and found the approved color palette for exterior fixtures. Armed with a can of agreeable beige paint that matched the perimeter fences, I spent Saturday morning giving my birdhouse a makeover. There, I muttered, stepping back to admire my work. Bland enough for you, Mrs. Kensington? 3 days later, another notice appeared in my mailbox. This one had a close-up photo of my newly painted birdhouse with the words, "Unauthorized color modification," stamped across it. The letter explained that any exterior changes required written pre-approval, and my birdhouse was now in violation of 2 separate bylaws. Fine. If they couldn't see it, they couldn't complain about it. For my second attempt, I relocated the birdhouse to my backyard, tucking it behind my shed where it seemed impossible to spot from any public area. I even took photos from various angles on the street to confirm its invisibility. The next weekend, I found Mrs. Kensington herself standing at the edge of my property, her neck craned as she pointed a pair of binoculars toward my backyard. "Excuse me?" I called out, startling her. Can I help you with something?" She lowered the binoculars, not even pretending to be embarrassed. "Mr. Chen, your unauthorized structure is still visible from Maple Street if one stands at the corner by the Johnsons' driveway. You walked 3 houses down just to check if you could see my birdhouse?" "I was conducting routine compliance checks," she replied coldly. "You'll receive an official notice tomorrow." For my third and final attempt, I got creative. I disguised the birdhouse as a decorative lantern, adding a small solar light inside and covering the entrance hole with a hinged flap that birds could push through. It looked like an ordinary garden light, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone clearing their throat loudly in my front yard. Mrs. Kensington stood on my walkway, clipboard in hand, examining my creation with the intensity of a bomb squad technician. "This," she said, tapping the clipboard with a manicured nail, "is still a birdhouse. The birds using it make that quite clear." She pointed to a chickadee that had just pushed through the flap. "Remove it today, or the $500 fine takes effect tomorrow morning." Defeated, I took down my creation that evening. Within days, I noticed the silence. No more cheerful chirping, no more wings fluttering, no more curious kids stopping to watch nature at work. Even my next-door neighbor Ron, who rarely spoke to anyone, mentioned how he missed all the happy bird noises. That silence was deafening, and it made something inside me snap. If the HOA wanted to play hardball over a simple birdhouse, they were about to learn they'd picked the wrong mechanical engineer to mess with. I'm not usually one for revenge. But that night, unable to sleep and still fuming over the HOA's pettiness, I fell into a YouTube rabbit hole. I started with birdhouse designs, then bird feeders, then bird cameras, and eventually, around 2 a.m., I stumbled upon a video about ornithology robotics. "Wait, what?" I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. The video showcased lifelike robotic birds designed for museum exhibits. They had realistic movements, recorded bird calls, and some even had small motors allowing them to fly along thin guide wires. The creator explained how he used them for educational displays when live birds weren't practical. That's when the idea hit me. I grabbed the HOA handbook and started reading with new purpose. I flipped through every page, every footnote, every addendum, looking for specific language about what constituted a birdhouse versus other lawn elements. "Bingo!" I nearly shouted, finding Section 7. 3.4 on permissible yard displays. The handbook explicitly allowed for seasonal decorations, educational displays, and lawn ornaments under 4 feet in height, with no pre-approval required. There was absolutely nothing prohibiting robotic birds or miniature buildings that weren't technically birdhouses. I grabbed a sketch pad and started drawing. If I couldn't have real birds in a birdhouse, I'd create something far more elaborate that technically violated no rules. My initial sketch showed a miniature airport with multiple runways, a control tower, and small hangars, all sized perfectly to house robotic sparrows. The birds would taxi down illuminated runways at dawn, fly along nearly invisible wires, and return to their hangars at night. I'd add authentic airport sounds, soft lights, and even tiny airport vehicles moving along the tarmac. I named the project Sparrow International Airport and drafted a materials list: weather-resistant wood and plastics for the structures, $300. 6 robotic birds with programmable movement paths, $800. Arduino controllers and electronics for automation, $500. Miniature LED runway lights and sound system, $200. Miscellaneous decorative elements, $150. Total budget, $1,950, just under my self-imposed $2,000 limit. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the hardware store. The cashier raised an eyebrow at my peculiar collection of items: model-making supplies, outdoor LED strips, small motors, and weatherproof paint. "School project?" she asked. "Something like that," I replied with a smile. "Teaching the neighbors about aviation." Back home, I cleared space in my garage and pinned my sketches to the wall. This would be no weekend project. I'd need at least 3 weeks to build everything properly. But the thought of Mrs. Kensington's face when she realized she couldn't do anything about it kept me motivated. As I laid out the materials and began measuring the base platform, I couldn't help but chuckle. The HOA had banned my humble wooden birdhouse, but had unknowingly set the stage for something far more elaborate and attention-grabbing. Sometimes malicious compliance is the sweetest revenge. The next 3 weeks became a blur of sawdust, soldering, and late-night programming sessions. I'd forgotten how much I loved building things, how time seemed to disappear when I was fully absorbed in a project. My garage transformed into a miniature manufacturing facility with different stations for woodworking, electronics, and painting. First came the base structure. I built it from marine-grade plywood and weather-resistant composite materials, designing hidden compartments for all the electronics and wiring. The surface I painted a deep green with lighter patches to resemble grass, adding tiny trees and shrubs for realism. 4 runways crossed the surface, each with its own taxiway leading to individual hangars. "Testing, testing," I muttered, connecting the first LED strip to the Arduino controller. The runway lights flickered to life, creating a perfect line of blue-white illumination across the miniature tarmac. I programmed them to activate automatically at dawn, just bright enough to be noticeable, but not so bright as to disturb anyone. Next came the most challenging part, the birds themselves. The robotic Sparrows arrived in plain brown boxes, each about the size of my palm. They were impressively detailed, with authentic-looking feather patterns and articulated wings. I spent days modifying their internal mechanisms and reprogramming their movement patterns. "Come on, little guy, you can do it," I encouraged, as I tested the first bird on a runway. It wobbled slightly, then smoothly rolled forward, its head turning realistically as it moved. When it reached the end of the runway, tiny servos extended its wings as nearly invisible fishing line lifted it gracefully into the air. The airport structures came next, a control tower with a rotating beacon, maintenance buildings with miniature equipment, and 6 individual hangars with doors that could open and close automatically. I added microscopic details, tiny luggage carts, scaled airport signage, and even a minuscule windsock that actually responded to breezes. For the final touch, I installed a small weather-resistant speaker system disguised as landscaping rocks. It would play gentle ambient sounds, distant aircraft engines, occasional radio chatter, and the birds' own chirping. The volume was carefully calibrated, just loud enough to be heard if you were standing nearby, but not enough to disturb anyone inside their homes. On the night before my big reveal, I carefully transported the entire setup to my front yard. It took 4 trips to move all the components, which I assembled under the cover of darkness. I positioned it prominently where my birdhouse had once stood, running a single, discrete power line underground to my porch outlet. As a final verification, I checked the HOA handbook one more time. My creation was under the height restriction, contained no prohibited elements, and could easily be classified as an educational display about aviation and ornithology. I even created a small placard describing how birds and aircraft share similar aerodynamic principles. Just before heading to bed, I made one final adjustment to the timing mechanism. The full system would activate at precisely 5:30 a.m., exactly when Mrs. Kensington walked her poodle past my house every morning. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, dreaming of tiny aircraft and the sweet taste of revenge. The alarm clock wasn't necessary the next morning. Pure anticipation had me awake and peering through my blinds by 5:15 a.m. Dawn was just beginning to break, casting a gentle pink glow across the neighborhood. I positioned myself by the window with a cup of coffee, heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Right on schedule, the airport hummed to life at 5:27 a.m. First, the runway lights activated in sequence. Then the hangar doors smoothly slid open as the control tower's beacon began its rhythmic rotation. A soft murmur of airport ambient sounds drifted through the morning air. At 5:29, Mrs. Kensington appeared at the corner, her white poodle prancing alongside her. I held my breath. The first robotic Sparrow emerged from its hangar precisely at 5:30, just as Mrs. Kensington reached the front of my house. It rolled smoothly down the runway, its tiny wheels barely visible beneath its body. The speaker emitted a perfect bird chirp, followed by a muted air traffic control message. Sparrow 117, cleared for takeoff. Mrs. Kensington stopped dead in her tracks. The poodle's leash went slack as she stood frozen, mouth slightly open, staring at my front yard. The bird reached the end of its runway and took flight, rising on nearly invisible wires to land gracefully on a branch of my maple tree. A second bird emerged, then a third, each following its programmed path with mechanical precision. I couldn't have choreographed her reaction better if I'd tried. Mrs. Kensington's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, realization, and finally, unmistakable fury. She fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it twice before successfully taking pictures. By now, the commotion had attracted attention. My neighbor Ron stepped outside in his bathrobe, coffee in hand. A car slowed as it drove past. Two kids on early morning paper routes stopped their bikes to watch. Mrs. Kensington marched up my walkway, a violation form already in hand. She must carry them everywhere, and stabbed my doorbell with her finger. "Good morning, Mrs. Kensington," I said pleasantly as I opened the door. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "What?" she hissed, gesturing wildly at my front yard. "Is that?" "That's my educational display about aviation and ornithology," I replied calmly. "It demonstrates the similar principles of flight between birds and aircraft. There's even an informational placard if you're interested." This is, she sputtered, flipping frantically through her violation form. "This is clearly prohibited." "Under which bylaw specifically?" I asked innocently. The gathering crowd grew larger. Parents walking children to the bus stop paused to watch the mechanical birds in their morning routine. One of the robotic Sparrows chirped and did a small circle around the control tower before returning to its hangar. "It's a structure, an unauthorized structure," Mrs. Kensington finally managed. "Actually, it's a lawn ornament under 4 feet in height, which Section 7, 3.4 explicitly permits without pre-approval," I countered. "I've measured it carefully." As we argued, something unexpected happened. Children began to gather around the display, pointing excitedly at the birds and the tiny airport vehicles. Mrs. Peterson from across the street commented loudly about how educational it was for the neighborhood kids. "This isn't over," Mrs. Kensington snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting for this afternoon." The meeting was held at 4 p.m. in the community center. I brought my copy of the HOA handbook, highlighted and tabbed, and prepared to defend my creation. What I didn't expect was the turnout. Nearly 30 neighbors showed up, most of whom had never attended an HOA meeting before. Mrs. Kensington presented her case with righteous indignation, showing photos and citing vague bylaws about community aesthetics. When my turn came, I simply explained that my display met all technical requirements and added educational value to the neighborhood. Then came the twist I never saw coming. Board member Mr. Gunderson raised his hand. "My granddaughter came home from school today talking about this display," he said. Her whole class wants to visit it for their science project on flight. Another board member, Mrs. Reyes, nodded. My grandson asked if we could build one too. He hasn't been this excited about science, well, ever. One by one, 6 of the 7 board members spoke in favor of my creation. They voted to classify it as an educational display, with only Mrs. Kensington dissenting. As the meeting adjourned, Mrs. Kensington stood, her face flushed. "This neighborhood is going downhill," she announced to no one in particular. "I've already called my realtor. I'm selling my house and moving somewhere that still values proper standards." The room fell silent for a moment before someone in the back, I think it was old Mr. Wilson, who rarely spoke to anyone, called out, "Need help packing?" Word of my robotic bird airport spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. What had started as an act of petty revenge quickly became our community's unexpected mascot. Within 2 weeks, 3 other neighbors had installed their own themed robotic bird attractions. Ron, my quiet next-door neighbor, surprised everyone with an elaborate bird train station, complete with tiny locomotives that chugged around his front garden. The Peterson family created a miniature carnival with robotic birds riding a working Ferris wheel. Most impressive was Mr. Gunderson's marina, where mechanical seagulls flew above tiny boats bobbing in a small pond. "We should connect them all," suggested 10-year-old Emma from down the street. "Like a bird city." Our HOA newsletter, previously filled with violation notices and reminders about trash can placement, now featured a map of what residents had begun calling the Avian Adventure Trail. Families would take evening walks specifically to see all the displays. Even more surprising was the email I received from Westridge Elementary School's science teacher, asking if her class could visit our Avian Technology Showcase for their unit on biomimicry and engineering. "The students will prepare questions in advance," she wrote. "Would you be willing to explain how you built it?" The following Tuesday, 23 fourth graders sat cross-legged on my lawn, notebooks in hand, asking surprisingly insightful questions about servo motors and flight mechanics. Their wide-eyed fascination as the birds performed their routines made every hour of work worth it. Mrs. Kensington's house sold quickly, perhaps too quickly, at well below market value. Her replacement on the HOA board was Janet Kim, a retired engineering professor with a passion for community projects. A month after she moved in, Janet stopped by as I was adjusting one of the runway lights. "I've been admiring your work," she said, watching as a robotic Sparrow taxied past. "The attention to detail is remarkable." "Thanks," I replied, pleased by her genuine interest. "It's been fun seeing everyone's creativity with their own displays." She hesitated for a moment before asking the question I never expected. "The HOA is planning a summer festival, and we were wondering, do you think you could build us a miniature bird football stadium, complete with team mascots and a working scoreboard?" I couldn't help but laugh. "I'd be happy to," I told her. "As long as it complies with all HOA regulations, of course." "Of course," she agreed with a wink. "We wouldn't want to violate any bylaws about unsightly structures." Yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of Sparrow International Airport. To celebrate, the HOA organized a neighborhood block party centered around all the robotic bird installations. Kids wore paper wings, adults brought bird-themed dishes, and someone even made a cake shaped like my airport control tower. The highlight of the celebration was the ribbon-cutting ceremony at our community center, where my original wooden birdhouse, the one that started it all, was installed in a place of honor. A small bronze plaque beneath it reads, "The Inspiration Piece. Sometimes great communities arise from unexpected beginnings." Standing there, watching neighbors chat and laugh together, I realized something important. Before the Bird Airport incident, I barely knew anyone's name on my street. Now we had community projects, shared creativity, and actual conversations beyond just nodding hello. Mrs. Kensington, I heard, moved to a gated community with even stricter HOA rules. Rumor has it she's already filed 17 complaints against her new neighbors. Some people never learn. As for me, I've started a weekend workshop teaching kids about robotics and engineering. Turns out spite can sometimes build something beautiful. Who knew? Have you ever turned an HOA dispute into something unexpectedly positive? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one and feature the best revenge tales in future videos.